So I've been in private practice now for nearly a decade, and I've worked with hundreds of teenage girls through depression and anxiety. And a couple of years ago, I decided to expand my focus to also helping parents through parent coaching, because what I was finding was that when I was able to support parents in helping them optimize their parental approach so that it targets their daughter's emotional health needs and create from home what I call a healing environment, I was able to make far greater progress than just simply focusing on the work I did with their child 1 or 2 hours a week. And through parent coaching, I basically found that there are 7 key principles that if I can help a parent adopt these principles by giving them the practical, actionable tools to do so, we were able to see dramatic progress, seeing their daughter go from a place of self-harm to self-love, from suicidality to hopes and dreams, from school truancy and failing out to academically thriving, from extreme isolation to healthy relationships and a healthy social circle, from a strained parent-child dynamic to a relationship between parent and child that is founded on mutual respect and trust and love and extends far beyond their daughter's struggles with depression and anxiety. And I've started to acquire a growing list of success stories of parents who feel empowered, that they're able to shift the focus from just managing their daughter's depression and anxiety to truly raising a confident, resilient, emotionally healthy kid. And so today I'm going to take you through those 7 principles. But if you want to see how these principles really lay themselves out in a step-by-step process that helps you guide your daughter beyond depression and anxiety, I would encourage you to go to the description box below and sign up for my free masterclass. The first principle is actually having a framework for depression and anxiety, the way you think about and conceptualize your daughter's emotional health. So one of the analogies I use is one that comes from developmental psychology. So in developmental psychology, we talk about a person being kind of like a tree or a plant. Now, a lot of your daughter's behaviors that stem from her emotional health problems are really what we could call the rotten fruits of behavior. They're like the fruits on this plant, so to speak. And it's so easy as a parent to get sidetracked and caught up in these fruits and wondering how to fix these fruits. And what we start to miss is the fact that as parents, we need to be a lot more like the gardeners. And if we can look to the fertilizer, look to the sunlight, to the shade ratio, to the temperature, what are all the conditions that are causing this plant to grow the way that it is? Because we may not have control over certain elements, but environment is actually the biggest element that lends itself to depression and anxiety, and it's the biggest factor in what keeps depression and anxiety going. And so if we can start to conceptualize your daughter's emotional health challenges in a different way and start to look at her as sort of like this plant, and the behaviors that this plant is producing is sort of just the byproduct of everything else, then we can start to make a lot more progress. And if you think about a plant, what actually grows a plant up? The plant takes energy from the sun, and that energy from the sun is what puts that plant in movement, in motion. It grows up that plant. And what is the equivalent of the sun for people? It is energy in motion, emotion. A lot of us get the idea that emotional health problems are a problem of emotions. Actually, emotions are the thing that drive growth and development in a healthy way. It is our unwillingness or our lack of confidence in our inability to experience emotions, our fear of emotions, our desire to suppress and avoid emotions that actually stunts the growth of your daughter. And so, your daughter can't have a healthy relationship with emotions that she is just not willing to feel. And so much of what we get trapped into as parents is, how do I help my daughter feel better? How do I help her feel happy? How do I help her reduce her anxiety? We are playing into the emotional avoidance agenda that actually is keeping her stuck. And so we have to differentiate what is my job as a parent and what is my child's. Your job as a parent is not to make your daughter happy, because in doing so, you will actually fall into emotional avoidance in trying to do that. Your daughter's job is to find a way of making herself happy, to find a way to live a fulfilling, rich, meaningful, happy kind of life. Your job is to create the context, the conditions of that garden, the environment that provides the safety and the security and the ability for her to experience her emotions, to grow confident in her ability to have her emotions, and to feel resilient in the face of challenging emotions. And this is what actually allows her to grow herself up and become resilient, confident, independent, emotionally healthy, a successful, thriving adult. The second principle is we have to adopt a provider's mentality. What is a provider? A provider is a person who is responsible for the physical safety and well-being of others. So if you think about a provider like a pilot, who is responsible for the physical safety and well-being of its passengers. And let's just imagine a scenario where this pilot is flying a plane through a really, really big storm. Do you want a pilot who starts to panic and second guess themselves in the middle of that storm? Do you want a pilot who starts to turn around and argue with the passengers who are panicking? Or do you want them to be focused on flying the plane and landing it safely? Do you want a pilot who is so emotionally detached that they offer no reassurance to the fact that, like, we're going to get through this, we're going to land safely, everything is going to be okay? Or do you want a pilot who is totally detached from the reality, the emotional reality of its passengers and can't afford that level of comfort? Do you want a pilot who, in response to the passengers arguing back and saying, turn the plane around, land the plane, and giving them direction, turns back to the passengers and says, okay, I'll do that. Yeah, because they're so afraid of the passengers being mad at them that they let go of their own responsibilities and what they know is best to be able to do. So this is not a provider situation, and it's not a situation that you would want to be in as a passenger on that plane. And so especially when your daughter is going through all of her emotional storms, it's really, really important to be able to adopt and maintain that provider mentality. And there are a number of things that get in the way. Most importantly, our own backup behaviors. Backup behaviors are the way that we kind of respond under extreme stress. And this is sort of like an unfair situation because I don't think there's many things more stressful than when your daughter is struggling with her emotional health. You feel like your family is collapsing around you. You feel like your own personal life is collapsing around you. And we are more inclined to lean on our own backup behaviors in a triggering situation under extreme stress, and that is going to get in the way of us being able to provide the kind of support and maintain the boundaries and the presence and the confidence that we need in order to help your daughter navigate through this emotional health storm. And so maintaining that provider's presence really requires you to distinguish, this is me and this is my daughter, and really untethering yourself from your daughter, from her mood, her wants, her attitude, so that you can provide the steady presence in the midst of that, not get tied up and manipulated and influenced by your daughter's behavior, wants, and attitude. And that begs the question of, can I tolerate those things without allowing it to collapse my own steady leadership and presence? The third principle is that of connection. People are hardwired to connect. Even though your daughter has these increasing needs for autonomy, she still also needs to feel you as her home base. And so when we're looking at the culture of your relationship, what is that culture from your daughter's perspective? Does it, from your daughter's perspective, seem like she wants to come to you if she's having a hard time, that she wants to be around you and seek you out for support? Does your daughter feel loyal to you? Because that loyalty might be the only thing that gets her out of bed on some days. When you have a culture of connection in your relationship and you have that emotional connection between you and your daughter, it allows you to parent from a place of natural authority versus a place of fear and control, which is the thing that we kind of end up falling back on when we don't have that natural power in the relationship. And it can be a little bit tricky because you have these two roles to play as the parent, right? So like on the one hand, you are in charge of these limits and structures and boundaries, and some of that's going to conflict with what your daughter wants. And simultaneous to that, when she breaks those limits and those boundaries, She needs maintaining safety and having a strong connection means that she's able to come to you and seek you out and say, I screwed up. I broke the rules and I'm in this sticky spot now and I don't know what to do. So how do you balance both at the same time? And you do it by creating emotional and psychological safety. Emotional and psychological safety is the environment you create within the relationship that allows your daughter to feel like it's natural and safe and easy to come and talk to you about things. And the other part about connection really pertains more to emotional health problems, because the thing about emotional health problems is that it creates these growing walls around your daughter's heart and mind. It's like your daughter puts up this defensive wall around herself and it's protective. It kind of, protects her from a feeling of vulnerability and it keeps people out. But it also is like a prison of her own making with a population of one, which becomes very isolating and feels increasingly suffocating to live within. And so in order to make progress, we fundamentally have to start to melt these defenses, bring down these walls. And that requires a lot of patience and not falling into your own backup behaviors, which could lead you into a place of, guilt tripping and shame and pressure tactics to sort of bring down these walls. And so how do we do that in a way that fosters emotional and psychological safety, which is the key to starting to melt these defenses? And this leads us to supportive partnering. But before we get there, if you are enjoying this video, if you're finding it helpful, please do me a favor and hit that like button so I know it's useful, and leave a comment below if you have any questions or if there's anything standing out to you that's really resonating as we talk about this. So supportive partnering, okay. In psychology, there's something that we talk about called the stages of change. And this refers to a person's mindset in relation to change. You have the mindset of denial, of complete lack of awareness. You have the mindset of contemplation, which is like ambivalence. Part of me wants to change and part of me doesn't. You have the mindset of like preparing to change or wishing you could change. If I had the confidence to do it, if I thought I was even capable of doing it, or maybe I'll do it tomorrow. You have the mindset of action, which is I am committed to this change, I am on board, let's do this. And then you have the mindset of maintenance, which is like this change has been fully adopted into my everyday life. It's not even something I have to think about anymore. And so change itself is a process people go through. And one of the biggest obstacles that I see parents fall into is that you are obviously in an action stage of change, and your daughter is most likely somewhere earlier in that process. And it's so tempting, especially in the midst of what feels like a crisis, to want to drag your daughter to an action frame of mind. And the way we end up doing this, of course, is through, lectures and pressure or pep talks and stuff that basically falls on deaf ears. And if anything, especially with teenagers, it can keep your daughter stuck in her emotional health problems, because teenagers, and I'm sure you've probably noticed this, they sort of become allergic to the advice of the people, the adults around them. So we have to approach this through actual partnering in a very different way. And that means meeting your daughter where she's at in the mindset she's in and creating a sort of dynamic in the conversation where it's me and you versus the problem instead of me versus you who are the problem. Okay, so in that partnering and me and you versus the problem, I start to reflect and just understand the mindset you're currently in, the way you're currently perceiving things. And you need to understand, your daughter needs to feel like you understand the mindset and the way that she's currently viewing things, even if the actions don't really make sense. And once you feel like you get it, she feels like you get it, you can start to help her differentiate herself. There's the part of her that is kind of locked in this depression and anxiety, and that's the part of her that truly doesn't want to change. And that's like a thing where, there's a weird comfort in being depressed and anxious. And especially if you're like around other teens who are also feeling that way, there's like a weird sense of, camaraderie and comfort in all of it. And so this part of her doesn't really want to change. But what we want to do is start to find within her the part that feels differently by sort of drawing out, by making like observations, drawing out, part of you wants this and part of you feels like it's losing that, and drawing out the conversation so that you can partner with the part of her that objects to the status quo. And a lot of your parental decisions will be based on your learning from these conversations with your daughter and these attempts to partner with her. Because if you discover that she is in a sheer denial or a lack of awareness sort of stage of change, that is going to change the way you set boundaries and the kind of environment, if we think about that plant, that you are going to need to create in order to protect her because of that lack of awareness or unwillingness. The next principle is that of creating structures and goals. And so once you've partnered with your daughter and you have an idea of the mindset she's in, you can approach these conversations depending on that mindset. But there are certain goals that just need to be in place in order to prevent the worsening of her anxiety and depression. So for example, going to school, and being able to say to your daughter, like, I know what it feels like to want to stay in bed and to be utterly exhausted and not have the energy to go, or to be afraid to go because of what you're about to encounter. And I also know what it feels like when you don't go to work or school and the fallout of all of that and how that actually makes everything worse. And so we're setting a goal here of approaching that emotional distress and learning to tolerate it and work through it. And we're doing dry runs, we're having conversation in advance, we're preparing ourselves for what we will encounter emotionally when the morning comes, for example, and we're laying out in advance, very proactively, the way that we're gonna handle it. And this is so different than the very reactive parental approach that we often take. And then we're kind of surprised, even though we shouldn't be surprised, that we're having this chaos in the morning. These proactive conversations where you're prepping and you're rehearsing and you're strategically identifying how you'll handle these challenges and you're framing these emotional difficulties that she's going to face as something that is tolerable and that she is equipped and able to manage is going to help her actually get through it. And part of that is going to be preparing her for the mindsets that she's likely to encounter. So there are certain mindsets that she's certainly going to run into. One of them is the mindset of like, it's not enough. I need more. I need more time. I need more time on my phone. I need more time in bed. I need more time to do my homework. I need more. And this part of herself, helping her come to learn that this part of herself is never, ever satisfied. And we have to sort of create some boundaries around that part of herself. And the other mindset of like, I don't feel like it, right? And what happens when we give into the mindset of I don't feel like it is we wait to do things until we feel like it, that we never actually end up feeling like we're doing. And then we ultimately feel worse and regretful because we fell into that trap. And so if she can be prepared in advance for I am likely to wake up in the morning and feel like it's not enough. It's not enough time in bed. Or I don't feel like it, right? And how she will respond to herself and what her plan is that she will do to get herself moving. So that is the process of goals and structures and being able to do that around some of the big problem behaviors that are, progress barriers that are keeping her in a state of depression and anxiety and that are feeding that depression and anxiety through emotional avoidance. The sixth principle is that of compassionate boundaries. So it's important to understand that boundaries are what wire impulse control. So your daughter has an urge to do something like stay in bed, isolate in her room, stay on her phone endlessly, not go to school, or work so hard at school that she has no time for anything else. Whatever it is, she has this urge to do something that is actually making her life worse and contributing to depression and anxiety. And she doesn't have the ability to hold the boundary within herself. The way she becomes confident in her ability to do so is by you holding the boundary on her behalf. This puts her in a situation where she comes up against that emotional distress and she learns that she can tolerate it, that she can actually get through it, that I can do hard things, that I don't have to give in to this just because I feel like it, just because it's hard. And so boundaries are utterly important and essential to emotional health. And when we have emotional health challenges, there is always a lack of boundaries present. Because when your daughter can't keep a boundary between herself and others, for example, this is when you end up with things like people pleasing, toxic relationships, peer pressure, perfectionism. All of these things are a lack of boundary between myself and the other people on the other side of me, because I don't want to tolerate the distress of how it's going to make them feel for me to hold that boundary. So it's an emotional avoidance thing that happens. Or it's a boundary violation between myself and myself and my urge, my want, my instant gratification. And when I don't hold that boundary within myself, it ends up looking like laziness or being irresponsible or extreme avoidance and isolation. All of these things that ultimately make me feel worse about myself and make me feel less confident in myself and in my ability to handle things. And so boundaries begin with the parents, and us holding the boundaries for your daughter and then helping her and coaching her and building her confidence that she can ultimately do that for herself. And the last principle is that of emotional healing. And this is sort of the culmination of every principle that has come before. It requires every principle in order to get to this point. Because once you have all of these structures in place and you've created this healing environment, you've created the dynamics for change to actually occur. You've created the dynamics for your daughter to actually become confident in herself and in her ability to overcome depression and anxiety. And you've started to draw out of her a part of herself that conflicts with the part of her that wants to stay stuck. And that is when she can start to come into therapy and actually have some discoveries or some desire for something to change, where she actually experiences a sense of internal motivation and drive and curiosity for what life might be like if things were to be different. And emotional healing is where she can start to process more deep-rooted emotions that she has previously been avoiding and now feels like, maybe she can face. And so this is where therapy starts to really become effective. Not that she shouldn't be in therapy along the whole way, because I think that she should, but this is really where you can start to see some momentum and change. So she's seeking you out, she's seeking other people out, she's actually starting to communicate and open up and seeing that there is life on the other side of this depression and anxiety. So as I lay out those 7 principles, I wonder, how are you feeling about it? Hit the like button if you're feeling good, if you're feeling empowered, if you feel like some of this is making sense, things are falling into place. Leave a comment below with any questions that you have and any discoveries that you're making. And I want to point you in the direction of a few resources so that you can continue this kind of learning within yourself. The first is a parent support community that I run on Facebook. It's a private Facebook group for parents who are helping guide their daughter through depression and anxiety, which you may want to check out because you'll find a community of other parents going through similar things. The second one is what I mentioned at the beginning, which is a free masterclass that I run that will help guide you through the process. All 7 of these principles laid out in a step-by-step process so that you know how to take your daughter through and beyond anxiety and depression. And the third is Path to Peace Parenting, which is the parent coaching program and community that I have started and run to help you and guide you through all of these principles and steps every step of the way. And so you can apply to that through the link that's in the description, and you can find all of the links to all of these resources in the description below. But I hope it's helpful. Subscribe to the channel if you did find it useful. Hit the bell button so that you're notified every time I post a new video, and please come back again.